It's the waitingfornextyear.com podcast. I am your host, Craig Lindell, one of many hosts that we've got on the network nowadays, but I am the original host, so you recognize my voice. On the other end of the line is Tom Valentino, who you might know if you've been around Cleveland sports social media for a long time. I realized when, first of all, you had me on your podcast maybe a month or so ago, The Nail in the Coffin, thenailpodcast.com, and in preparation for having you on my podcast, I started to do some homework trying to figure out exactly where I knew you from, and then I realized it really didn't matter. You and I have talked to each other for so long and been interacting for so long that it's like the origin story doesn't matter. But for everybody else, how did you find yourself becoming kind of an integral part of Cleveland sports, social media, and now, with the podcast, kind of, borderline media?
I'm going to have to first, thanks for having me on. This is really, really great. And I'm going to have you do some negotiating for me the next time I'm up for any sort of a contract somewhere, because you're making me sound like $1 million here. I don't know. I've always kind of been in on the whole Twitter deal and social media in general. And I know for me, I had been with the News Herald doing sports writing kind of really before social media became a real thing, and I kind of gotten off the sports beat and went into business, and still kind of needed that outlet to get in on get my sports fix, and just kind of I tried to blog for a long time ago. Geez, it's probably been about 8 or 9 years, and that just turned into more work than it was fun for me. And I don't know. The podcasting thing has been really fun, doing it with my good buddy Travis for about a year and a half now, and we're having a lot of fun with it.
So what you've been doing it about a year and a half, but what made you say, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to do this, I'm going to do the setup, because it's not, it's not the most impossible thing in the world, but it's also not super easy and intuitive to figure out how to become an audio editor and RSS feed manager and doing the whole podcast thing. I mean, most people just load it up on their iTunes, but there's a lot of Googling that must take place before you can say, I do have a podcast, and yes, you can download it on iTunes.
Yeah. I'm really glad you asked that, actually, because I can tell you, I started listening to podcasts before I even had a smartphone. And I think, like a lot of people, I kind of discovered the whole genre from listening to Bill Simmons back when he was on ESPN's Page 2. I would stream it on my desktop at work. And, I always thought, I was like, wow, this is really great. I don't have to listen to commercials or anything like that. And then I think probably the second podcast I discovered was yours. And for me, the light kind of went on that, hey, you don't really need to be backed by a multi-billion-dollar media corporation to put on a podcast that sounds really great. So it was kind of one of those things that I had always just kind of had stowed away as a pipe dream. And, a year and a half ago, Trav and I were kind of texting back and forth, and we talk sports all the time. And I don't know, he just kind of made an offhanded remark about doing a podcast. And I was like, if you're serious, I would totally be down to try it. I mean, because this is something I've really wanted to do for a long time, and just didn't think it was going to be like a realistic possibility for me. But it was like, once I knew I had somebody on board with me, it kind of gave me a little bit more of a boost, I guess. And, we kind of were kicking around ideas for show titles and what we wanted to do with it, and all the usual stuff when you're trying to get one of these things off the ground.
It's worse than naming a band.
I'm going to have to just assume you're right on that one, because I'm about as tone deaf as they come with.
It's just really hard.
Yeah, I'm kicking myself because I actually came up with a show title for us that I really liked, and I started searching for it, and I can't even remember what it was now. It was some sort of a basketball-related thing, but somebody else had already had it, and I was like, oh, well, I want something that hasn't been done before, and I'm a huge NBA Jam fan from back in the day, and I started thinking of some of the catchphrases that the announcer said of that game, and I was like, the nail in the coffin. And at that point, I was kind of like, this was before, the Cavs obviously had won a title, and, the Indians were back in the World Series and all that stuff. And I was just, it kind of felt fitting for a lot of the ways Sunday afternoons in the fall end and some of our other teams and things like that. And it was one of those things like, all right, I'm going to sit on this for like a week. And if I really still like it, then I'll throw it out. And Trav liked it. And we kind of ran with it from there. And actually a funny story with that, when we were getting the show ready to start, I looked up and I had to like do a whole bunch of like LinkedIn stalking and a bunch of other stuff. And I found the guy that did the voiceover work for NBA Jam. And I reached out to him. I emailed him and tried to see if he could, if he'd be willing to record an intro for us. And he initially responded back to me, but once he realized who we were, it was I'm still waiting for another reply.
Which is really funny because it probably and you, for anybody who has not heard the podcast, it's thenailpodcast.com. You should go subscribe. But you guys do use the sounder from the video game. But if you'd gotten the real guy to do it, it probably would have sounded bad. Like it sounds authentic because it sounds like that kind of that grainy 1995 era video game sound that we used to be super impressed with. So I think you're better off.
Thanks. And you know what? I agree that it's kind of grown on me, and I've had a few other people comment on it. So I think it's going to stick around for a while.
And
or at
screw
least
that
until
voiceover one-hit wonder.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last thing about your podcast, and then we'll get into some actual topics. So just what were you setting out to accomplish with it? Because one of the things that I've enjoyed about it, and I hope you take this as a compliment, is that your podcast does not try too hard to be like some revolutionary thing. You guys you stay in your lane. It's topical. You talk sports. It's not out to like shock or have any kind of crazy themes or try and reinvent the wheel. It's just really solid at doing what it's supposed to do, and it comes out regularly. It like fills all the boxes of what a podcast is supposed to be.
I think we try to do something. I mean,
and you have good guests, and you have good guests,
such as yourself.
Well,
but
I enjoyed Kevin Kleps from Cranes.
Yeah, that was we got him on this past Saturday, and that ended up turning out really great. He's always awesome to, because for those who don't know Kevin, you should absolutely be following his work over at Cranes Cleveland Business. He kind of owns the sports biz beat in town. He does a really great job with it. And
David Zavik and Jeff Shudell, and I mean, you guys have guests, so that's all.
Yeah, I think we do probably about half the shows we have guests on and half we don't. And
I'm just proving that I wasn't stroking myself.
We try to mix it up a little bit, and sometimes we try to bring on guests that people are familiar with, like a lot of the names you just dropped there. And a lot of times we try to bring on people who you might not necessarily have come top of mind. Like a really great example, and one of my favorite ones that we did actually was back in the summertime when Muhammad Ali passed away. I knew my dad was like a really big boxing fan from back in the day, and I think Ali passed away on like a Friday night. And Saturday morning, I called my dad, and I was just like, hey, Ali passed away last night, and I just kind of wanted to have him tell me some stories about watching his fights. And he just like made an offhanded remark to me like, yeah, I met him and talked with him for a while, right? and I was just like, wait, what? Like, really? No, you never told me. How would you never told me this? And he told me the story about meeting him in the airport in Chicago, I think, during a layover. And it was like a really cool story. I'm like, well, I got to get you on the podcast. And, it's neat to be able to like have family on or something like that. And I don't make a regular habit of doing that sort of thing, but it's like that was 2 weeks after we had the actor who played Shooter McGavin in Happy Gilmore on, because he was down at the Akron Rubber Ducks game for Happy Gilmore night, and I found out that he was going to be in town, and I was like, hey, this would be really awesome if we got this guy to, come on the podcast. And the Rubber Ducks were really cool about it and let me come down there and talk to him. And that guy, Christopher McDonald, he is awesome. they told me I was going to get like 15 minutes with him, and he ended up hanging out for like a half an hour, and they had to drag him away to go do other appearances. So
I'm disappointed you actually came with his name. I was hoping you would just refer to him as the guy who played Shooter McGavin. He would just be known as that forevermore on this episode of the podcast.
He is a 5-star, that guy.
But he's awesome.
He is, and he was super nice. And the thing that I loved about that one the most was he, if you go back and watch the end of that movie, he sinks like a 30-foot putt, and they very specifically, like, there's no editing. It was an actual putt that he made, and he was really proud of the fact that he told them, like, I'm not letting you just edit this, so I'm going to make this putt. And I think it was like he says how many tries, like I want to say like 4 or 5 tries, and when he makes it, like his reaction and the over the top, like, finger pistols and strutting around, that was all like really genuine because he was that excited that he made it. So
that's so great. I'll have to look up that episode. That was before I started listening, so I haven't heard that one yet.
That was right around Memorial Day, end of May.
Okay. I'll try and find it and link it up in the show notes too. I've got a guest coming on later in the week where I'm really going to dig into kind of the Browns season and what happened. But I did want to talk a little bit about the passing of David Modell and just kind of how that reaction filtered its way through Twitter and everything else. And there was some kind of intra-Cleveland squabbling over that story. Anthony Lima, for one, a friend of this show, somebody I went to high school with, was kind of saying, hey, Brown's Twitter, like a dude with children passed away. Like, maybe we could show a little bit of class. You don't have to like the guy, but maybe control your reaction. I think I'm paraphrasing. But, we didn't write about it at Waiting for Next Year. We certainly talked about it behind the scenes. But there wasn't, there weren't any really like strong public reactions from us, at least as far as I remember or know. But what did you make of the whole of that kind of news filtering its way through Cleveland and the reaction that occurred online?
I got to be honest. I'm either following the wrong people or I'm following the right people, because the amount of conversation I saw about that on social media was really minimal. Like, I saw Anthony Lima and some of the comments he made, but as far as the negative stuff, I can't say I'm totally stunned. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I think somebody made a deposit on Art Modell's grave.
Oh, yeah.
So if people were willing to go that far for him, I can't say I'm entirely shocked that people would say not nice things about David Modell, especially after some of the comments that he had made. I think it was on the Believe Land documentary last year. So I don't know. Not really a good look. And if Anthony was kind of chiding people for that, I don't really blame him. That's
Yeah, no, and I don't think Anthony was surprised either. By the way, he knows.
No,
he knows just like we do. It sounds like David Modell and his passing didn't fill much brain space in your neck of the woods.
He really didn't. And I got to be honest, like the Browns in general this year were just such a weird phenomenon for me, and I know that so many people still get so upset week in and week out. And, it was just kind of funny for me during the season looking through my Time Hop app on my phone and just kind of seeing how worked up I used to get over these games. And I just kind of felt like with the Browns when, they were bad, as bad as they were last year, and, you're bringing in a new coaching staff and you see what the quarterback situation looks like. And they basically punted on free agency last year. And then they get into the draft and trading down and stockpiling. I mean, the writing was really clear on the wall for me that like they don't give a shit about this season. Like this season is about positioning themselves better to really kind of hit the gas pedal and make something of it going into 2017 and really start things in earnest then. And it just it sucks for those of us who've got to fill up airtime and column inches in the newspaper and website pages and whatnot, trying to get through a rudderless season like that. But I mean, it was just kind of, and that was why, like with our podcast, we really spent very little time talking about the Browns because it was like at a certain point, just what more could you say? And
yeah, no, it's true. And this is the debate we've been having. And I agree with everything that you said, and there's always a but with the Browns. I think they didn't plan for things to go as poorly as they ended up going this year and flirting with the infamy of being winless. And do you think you can have a positive developmental season and still go winless? I mean, I know we don't have to have that debate now because they got the one win and they still got the number one pick, so it kind of all worked out. But I think they were flirting with even more. They were flirting with disaster when they were trying to just have a developmental year.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree with that. And no, I think a winless season would have been awful and catastrophic, really. I mean,
so
I don't
here's
know.
the question, though. Why do you think so? Because that's the debate. I do too, by the way. But that's the debate we've been having behind the scenes, and I have an email conversation on this very topic coming out. So I don't mean to have like this conversation behind that person's back, Bodie from our site. But why do
You're just polishing your talking points before you put it into the email.
I really am.
We're storyboarding here. We're working out the fine points. So
it's like talking in the mirror, before you have to give a speech or something.
Sure.
No, so why do you think that the winless season is more disastrous, even though this season didn't matter?
I mean, you just don't want to be associated with that, and I mean, people can still rattle off right off the top of their head the Buccaneers from the 70s and the '08 Lions, and nobody remembers the last team that went 1-15. And I don't think, I mean, as little as the Browns cared about this year, I don't think they were ever envisioning 0-16 being a real possibility. And I think they had enough wild cards, I guess would probably be the best term I could come up with, that if they're going to throw enough stuff at the wall that something's bound to stick, whether it's like one of their 14 rookies being better than advertised, or it's RG3 getting hooked up to the Juvenation machine, I guess, and resurrecting his career, or just something somewhere clicking for them to be the thing that kind of gets them by for the year. And I mean, it was nothing. I mean, there was really nothing to it that none of those things panned out. So,
and then the injuries started piling up too.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think in their wildest dreams I knew they thought that they weren't improving necessarily on a 3-win team, but I don't think they thought they were going down. I don't think they thought they were flirting with 0 wins.
Probably not.
And I think you're right. I think they and RG3 getting hurt probably in some ways, if they could have gotten that win a little bit earlier, all the pressure would have been off, and they probably would have developed in the second half of the season much better.
Yeah, and I keep thinking back to that game against the Dolphins, and I mean, I think for me it was a little bit more personal, just because a really good friend of mine who's a season ticket holder and he stuck through it for so long was actually just about to be getting shipped off for his 3rd deployment overseas with the military, and it was like his last game, I think, that he was going to be able to watch here, and a bunch of us
and they couldn't do it for him.
Yeah, I know. And it was like one of those things where it was like already at that point in the season, I'm like, this season is a lost cause and you're basically playing for draft position. But I was like, damn it all, I just want to see them win one for my buddy here because, he kind of needs that. And, I mean, we remember how that game panned out. But, I think you're right. I think a lot of things might have gone differently this year had they kind of just broken the ice on that whole deal and just gotten a win out of the way early in the season. Because I mean, a lot of those games early in the year, they were in it at least, and it just really felt like the more the injuries piled up, the wheels really started falling off towards the second half.
Well, and they were goofy injuries too. I mean, obviously the RG3 one was pretty goofy, and then Corey Coleman is the real Brownsiest Browns injury, because that's the kind of I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. I haven't read an in-depth account or otherwise dug in, but like that's the kind of injury that happens when you've got like a bunch of guys who aren't talented enough to be professionals playing on the practice field, like at least in my mind.
Yeah, it's I mean, it got almost.
I might
comical.
just be creating a scenario, but
Yeah.
This is Sports Talk Radio. I can do whatever I want.
This is your house, your rules.
Yeah, so let's switch a little bit here. The Cavaliers coming off a pretty disastrous loss to the Warriors, or at least a big loss in terms of the diff, if you will. But it's hard to really care that much. You know, that this season, last season, the Cavaliers winning it all, and the way this season is playing out has really kind of gone to prove that the regular season in the NBA really, really, really doesn't mean hardly anything at all. Were you having trouble feeling panicked over the 30? I think it was a 34-point loss, or did it? Was it like David Modell? Did it not occupy much brain space for you?
Oh, I mean, I watched it, and I watched it deep into the fourth quarter because I'm way more invested in the Cavs than I'll ever be in the Browns. But I think for me, like I wasn't upset, especially with the Cavs. The thing that really kind of irked me about that game was more of the fact that this is the signature rivalry. No matter what LeBron and Kyrie want to tell you, this is the signature rivalry for the NBA. I think it's as good as any rivalry in sports right now. And, you only get 2 of these games in the regular season a year. And it to me, it sucks that the NBA is going to waste one of them by putting it in a position where the Cavs are on the 6th game of a road trip that starts in Brooklyn and somehow ends up on the West Coast. I mean, that was about as brutal of a road trip as you could possibly have. And I know they had a couple days off, but I mean, they've been on the road.
You're just making excuses, Cavs homer. No, I'm just kidding you. No.
Maybe I am. I don't even care. I just, to me,
it's a fact. It's like a schedule loss.
It is. And the fact that, like, everybody who pays attention to the Cavs closely that was on social media on Monday, literally all afternoon, all I read was, I wouldn't be surprised if they get run out of the gym tonight. And that was everybody knew it was coming because it just like all the makings were there. And it was exactly what happened. And it's like, if we could all see that coming, it would be really nice if the NBA would have as well. And maybe to a certain degree, I mean, it's more of a priority to them to have a game on Martin Luther King Day, which I understand. And, with the Cavs, you're kind of limited because you got the Disney on Ice taking up the 2 weeks before that at the arena. So it was just the way that everything just kind of fell and didn't really have a lot of options with it. But it's like, man, you got to find a better way. I mean, these are you've only got so many games in the regular season that people should really care about. And that's one of them. And you basically punted on it when it should have been easily avoidable.
Well, and even last year when the Cavaliers got blown out by Golden State, they were coming off the 6-game road trip to play that game. They did play that game at home, but they came off a 6-game road trip that ended on January 15th. And I only remember this, and I did look up the dates, but I only remember this because my friend told me, he's like, did you see LeBron's quotes coming off the road trip at the end of the road trip? He was talking about spending time with his family and seeing his kids and not having seen his kids in almost 10 days and kids. He couldn't have said less about the upcoming giant matchup with the Warriors on a Monday night on TNT. Like, just because we're all excited for it and just because the NBA schedules it on Martin Luther King Jr. Day on TNT doesn't mean that the teams are going to be as geeked up for it like it's a playoff game.
Right, and you could see within the first 5 minutes of that game that the Cavs looked like that arena was the last place in the world that they wanted to be at that point. I mean, I think the plane was on the tarmac and ready to roll, ready to, wheels up and start heading back.
I wonder if that's like a defense mechanism for LeBron too, where he kind of defends against the criticism by going, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly see that. And the other thing with that, honestly, and maybe this is just the homer in me coming out again, but it felt to me with like after the way the Christmas Day game went and the way the finals ended last year, the Warriors had a lot more incentive to play well in that game last night than the Cavs did. There's nothing left for the Cavs to really prove at this point until they get back to the finals. in June coming up here. And that's the other thing that's like just so bizarre to me about this. And when you just kind of get back to what you were saying about how, just the importance or lack thereof of the NBA regular season. Like I'm listening to 92.3 on my way home today, and they're just talking like it's just a done deal. Like, the Cavs and the Warriors are playing in June. It'll be the finals the third year in a row. It's like two teams have never met in the finals 3 years in a row in the history of the NBA, and we're getting close to 75 years that the league's been around. Like it's not normal. Like and yet everybody's like not even considering the possibility that anybody else might make the finals, and really they probably shouldn't, because barring a catastrophic injury for one of these teams, it's hard to envision a scenario where one of them actually gets beaten in the 3 rounds leading up to that.
Well, and the weird thing is that I can't remember a time in the history of the league where the 2 top teams got better each season during that 3-year run. So the Warriors win over a depleted Cavaliers team. I thought they were, they obviously got better. They won 73 games. The Cavaliers got better. They upgrade. As painful as it is to see Delly playing someplace else, he was a role player, and they filled it with more role players. They got a whole season of Channing Frye. They got a whole season of this, that, a whole season of Ty Lue. They get better. And so it's like each team, and obviously the Warriors respond to losing in the finals to getting Kevin Durant. So that each one of these teams has gotten better each of the last 3 years. It's rare that you can say that about a championship team or a championship contending team 3 straight years, because they usually, it's that attrition. The players get overrated, they leave, and the Cavaliers have kept everybody and added, and so have the Warriors. That's the weirdest thing.
Yeah, and it's been an arms race between those two franchises, and I think it's been circumstances in a lot of cases, like just the way that the CBA fell and everything that kind of just created the perfect storm to get Kevin Durant an opportunity to even join Golden State. And I think with the Cavs, they've had pretty much their core in place now for a couple of years, and it's been more about adding the ancillary pieces. And David Griffin, I know people that don't really pay as close of attention to the NBA, they like to kind of make the old joke about LeBron being the GM of the Cavs, and I kind of cringed when he had made some sort of comment about adding another piece, and then it was like 24 hours later they traded for Kyle Korver. I'm like, well, that's not going to do anything to help that stupid narrative. But David Griffin, I think, he's just done an unbelievable job of finding the most creative ways to add players. I'm still trying to figure out like what it was that he had on Milwaukee that convinced them to agree to a sign and trade when they brought in Delly over the summer, when they really didn't need to do that. It was basically like giving the Cavs a trade exception for nothing, and it ended up letting them get Dunleavy, who they obviously flipped into Kyle Korver. And it's just, and then the other thing that Griffin had to do to make that Korver trade happen was trading one of his first-round picks for the other first-round pick that he had already given to Portland in another trade last year, and just the creativity that he has. And I'm sure we're going to see it again here at some point between now and the trade deadline to bring in the backup point guard that we've been hearing about for the last 6 weeks.
So it's interesting. I'm fascinated by the part where the Cavaliers, what did they have over Milwaukee? I wonder if they threatened to match the offer sheet, because they had a chance to match, and then all of a sudden they announced they wouldn't match, and the trade exception was in place, and the sign and trade happened. I wonder if they were like, hey, we'd love to sign and trade. We're not saying we're going to match, but we could if you don't sign and trade them.
That's a good theory. It's strange to me how important that deal ended up becoming and how relatively little talk there's been about it. It was just kind of like, yeah, and I think it was either McMenamin or Wendy who had the story kind of laying out all the moves, and even they just kind of glossed over it. And that's a really good theory. But I think at the same time, when Delly verbally agreed to that or signed the offer sheet or whatever, and LeBron came right out and said like, congrats on getting paid, and was basically writing him off on the spot. I mean, I guess theoretically it could have been the Cavs still coming in and matching, but the writing seemed to be on the wall that he was on his way out.
Well, by the time he gets that offer sheet, he's getting that money somewhere. So
right,
and good for Delly. I still root for Delly, and I know that some of the analytics and stuff don't love him, but some of what he does, especially on defense, kind of bugging star players and whatnot, is not captured in the box score. It's just not. And I'll take a guy like Delly as a role player, as a backup off the bench any day. That Milwaukee might be rolling the dice, putting him in the starting lineup, but you can't argue against having a role player like that.
Actually, it's strange. The other guard that I think they drafted at Brogdon, in a lot of ways, has kind of outplayed him this year, and I think it's kind of making some people in Milwaukee a little bit nervous about handing Delly $40 million, and just given the Cavs' salary cap situation right now, I don't think $40 million for Delly is necessarily a wise investment. That said, there would absolutely be a spot for him in this rotation, and he would have some real value to them, and they could certainly use his services right now with the needs that they have, and the void that he left really hasn't been filled. No,
not yet. But obviously you got to have some. If you have faith in anything other than LeBron, which you have faith in, it's Griffin getting something done. So just for those who've been listening, I'm talking to Tom Valentino from The Nail Podcast, The Nail in the Coffin, thenailpodcast.com. You can find him on Twitter. It's The Nail Podcast on Twitter?
Yeah, that's our show's Twitter account. But I mean, other than just having an automatic feed that goes up when we have new episodes, don't really use that too much. We've started trying to put some more things on our Facebook page, facebook.com/thenailpodcast. But if you really want to find me on Twitter, it's probably better to go to my personal one, which is one Tom Valentino.
One Tom Valentino. So I do. Before we get to the final topic, I'm going to talk about the Indians. I'm going to put in my own little kind of live read here, because Waiting for Next Year has started using Patreon, and a lot of you have joined. We hit 50. We hit 50 people, and this is something you might want to consider down the road as you build your audience, Tom. It's really great because it allows you to create a relationship with your listeners. They pay a little bit of money on a monthly basis. They choose their own level, and we provide some additional value to them beyond what we're doing on the podcast and on the website. It kind of creates a little special fast lane for the people who can support you. Nobody has to, of course. Everything remains free. This is all just bonus material and bonus access to us. And it's been really cool. It's been I never in my wildest dreams did I think we'd get to 50 people in the first 3 months. So thank you to the Patreon supporters, and please, if you want to, in this new year, please, even if it's just for a couple months, to get some freebies and access and see what it's all about, join up at patreon.com/WFNY, patreon.com/WFNY. That's patreon.com/WFNY. And now, the Cleveland Indians kind of had their own Patreon with the playoff tickets. And it sure seems like they're intent on spending and taking advantage of this open window. We'll talk about Edwin Encarnacion in just a minute, but the window appears to be finally closed on Jose Bautista. But I think the Indians were legitimately trying to get Jose Bautista.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that. The whole thing with his contract situation was kind of strange, and I think he's just kind of at that point in his career where he probably wants to try to get that last multi-year deal, and it just
he only
really
got the 1 year.
Yeah, I was going to say it just wasn't happening for him. So I think Toronto had probably assumed heading out of last season that he was as good as gone. So they're probably as surprised as anybody that they were able to bring him back for another year. And good for them. I guess that's going to help them sell some tickets, if nothing else. I think he was a guy that was pretty well liked up in Toronto and had a good connection with that community. And, it would have been really interesting to see the Indians bring him in, especially considering, it brought in Edwin Encarnacion. And, those guys were the heart of the lineup of the team that you just throttled in the league championship series. But, I mean, I guess the hot stove makes for strange bedfellows at some point sometimes.
Were you surprised at all, and I don't know if you were exposed to this on your social media feed, but were you surprised at all that the people who don't like Jose Bautista and didn't like the way he acted in the playoffs were against the Indians bringing him in?
Yeah, I mean, come on. That's sports, man. You're supposed to hate the other team and hate all their antics. And, I mean, I think back to the days of Albert Bell and how people in other cities probably felt about Albert Bell. And,
they couldn't have liked him.
No, absolutely not. I mean, he was a jerk, but he was our jerk. Although I will say the one time when I want to say 9 or 10 years old, I had won the Sherwood-Williams contest to be the honorary ball boy for the day. And I got to sit down by the bullpen at the old stadium. And before the game, they let me sit in the dugout during batting practice. And I sat down next to Albert Bell while he was getting interviewed by a newspaper reporter who he did not try to throw a ball at or curse out like Hannah Storm or anything like that. It was a very civil conversation, and he was really nice to me. So for all the tales you hear about Albert Bell being a jerk, I always thought he was pretty cool. So just a whole tangent there, but no, if people had an issue with any of that stuff, I think that would have dissipated really quickly the first time he hit one about 430 feet to left field at Progressive Field for us.
The other one that baffled me, and some of I don't want to rat on some of my WFNY brethren behind the scenes, but some people were talking about how the Indians shouldn't sign Jose Bautista because in our market it wouldn't make sense to spend that money on him. And I was like, I, as a fan or follower or whatever marginal media member, all I'm asking is, does it make the team better? It's not my job to look at the Dolan finances or figure out, their spending patterns over the next 20 years. Does it make them better today? And is this player going to add more value than Nick Swisher? That's all I really care about. Well, I know, but do you really care about the Dolans financially?
I don't at all. And the fact that, this offseason, I think, especially, they've obviously had a big influx in ticket sales. I mean, we keep hearing about how the season ticket numbers are looking up. And while we don't have necessarily the specific numbers, I mean, when they brought in the new minority owner late in the 2016 season, I think that certainly helped pad the bottom line. And I think,
seems like it.
Yeah. And I think when they sold, I might have my timeline wrong here, but I'm pretty sure when they sold STO.
It was what? Sometime in 2013?
I want to say it was the year that they went on the big spending spree to bring in Bourne and Swisher.
Yep.
So it was when they have an influx of cash, there was a precedent here for them being willing to go out and break the bank a little bit. And if you were ever going to do it, it's got to be this year when you're that close to having won the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, hey, that's what you're here for. That's why that's why you get into the business. You want to win championships. This is your chance. And as we've learned the hard way, those don't come around. Those opportunities don't come around every year.
No, and the Indians are in that lucky position right now. It's very very similar to what happened with Steph Curry, where the Warriors were in a position financially with Steph Curry, having signed him before he kind of broke out, that they were able to clear enough cap space to bring in a Kevin Durant for a max contract or a super huge amount of money. And the Indians' starting rotation is very similar to that, where the entire rotation combined makes $27 million a year right now, which is kind of a once in a lifetime, at least once in a generation kind of an opportunity, at least in the current financial sports business climate. That just doesn't happen.
Well, you remember how we were talking about the Browns a little while ago, and I said their theory was, let's throw as much shit at the wall as we can for 2016 and see what sticks, and nothing did. The Indians' rotation has kind of been the exact opposite of that, where they threw a lot of reasonable contracts at a lot of these guys at an early point in their career, and a whole bunch of them panned out. I mean, Kluber and Carrasco, and I see Salazar developing,
and the trade for Bauer.
And Bauer, that was a nice deal, but
it was a ballsy deal.
It was, but it really all panned out for him. So, fair play to them for getting it done. And I mean the rotation, and I think being able to lock all those guys down on good deals, it's really not that dissimilar to the way they built their nucleus back in the early to mid '90s. I mean, the whole thing there was getting a trade for Kenny Lofton and bringing in Sandy Alomar. I think he was in the deal with the Padres, right? Wasn't that the trade, the Joe Carter trade, and and Bell and Baerga and Charlie Nagy and all those guys. It was signing those guys early in their careers and locking them up and riding that wave out when they all panned out. So.
How much of this do you think has to do with? How much of this do you think has to do with Mark Shapiro leaving and Chris Antonetti kind of putting he and Chernoff kind of putting their mark on this team?
Boy, that's a great question. I mean, it's hard to say for sure. Personally, I don't think the Andrew Miller trade ever would have happened if Mark Shapiro was still here.
No,
just based on precedent from past deadlines.
And Mark Shapiro's penchant to overvalue all of his prospects forever and ever and ever. Right.
Yeah, that's the one. And I frankly, I don't think the Edwin Encarnacion deal happens either. Although it's kind of strange. It sounded like he actually was originally offered more money by the Blue Jays, and
he decided to roll the dice, and then the Blue Jays dug in. So I honestly think they benefited from Mark Shapiro's kind of blinking and bad poker.
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
Either that, or it's reminiscent of times in Indians past where we felt like the Indians were making an offer just to say that they did, even though they weren't actually going to get him.
Oh, the Jim Thome free agency is the first example that comes to my mind, and that was the one that always kind of frustrated me. Was I felt like whatever their offer was at that time, and that's exactly what happened there. There's really no better way for me to say it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. Just as unbelievable as it is how bad the Browns are, it's unbelievable the way it all came together for the Indians and how they've kind of doubled down on it. Like, there's no guarantee. It might not work. They might not be able to put another season together like that, but it's really hard to argue with the process they've put together this offseason.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's really impressive. You just look at how many of the key pieces from that team that took them to the World Series this past year are not just locked up for 2017, but like into 2018 and, several of them for many years beyond that. And they've really positioned themselves to be good for several years. And, you can never just assume. And I think especially in baseball, we've seen, teams that have gotten derailed when their futures were looking up for a lot of years. But man, it's hard to argue hard to argue against the way the Indians have built things. And I really hope that the box office treats them well this year and that their attendance perks up because they've earned it. And I know for me personally, I'm going to try to make an effort to get down there to more games this year. The games I went to this past year were all great. It's a good time down there. They do a really great job on their game nights, and just to see what they're doing in the clubhouse and with their roster. It's a likable group, and they're really damn good. So it's a good story.
Yeah, it's a great story, and you can hear all about it all year long on your podcast as well as the one you're listening to right now. But he's Tom Valentino from The Nail in the Coffin, thenailpodcast.com, facebook.com/The Nail Podcast, The Nail Podcast on Twitter, one Tom Valentino on Twitter. Did I get all those right? Because I was going from memory.
Man, the check's in the mail, my friend. That
awesome.
Was fantastic.
All right. Well, and it was so nice of you to have me on your podcast. I'm glad that I'm aware of it now. I listen all the time.
Thank you.
What's coming up? Any big guests? I'm putting you on the spot.
We've got a soft commitment for next week that I know of for sure. No, I don't want to put the whammy on it, but it should be a good one. And go check out the Kleps one from this past weekend. We don't normally record on a Saturday, but just with the schedules for me and Trav last week, it just ended up, that was the way it worked out, and ended up turning out really great. So we were really happy with that one.
I forgot, and I'm not gonna do this to you, but when your partner was talking about stadium financing and how the city owns the stadium, I was screaming at my iPhone.
Oh no.
No, it's fine. He's entitled to his opinion. I just wanted to argue with him. It was compelling. But
well, it sounds like you've given us a reason to get you back on our show here sooner than later.
There's other people that you should have on to argue stadium finance better than I do. But yeah, no, it was a good listen, and it's good to have those differing opinions. So good stuff. Good luck to you. Thanks so much for coming on. We'll do it again. Thanks to all of you guys out there for listening. Please check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/WFNY. That's what keeps us going. It's what helps us drive to the next level. We appreciate you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time. It's been the waitingfornextyear.com podcast.